Hey everyone, it is Create a Player here, and today we're going to be starting a tutorial series where I'm going to be discussing the variety of ways that we can use tattoos to increase the quality of our created fighters. All of the footage that you'll see in this series is from EA Sports UFC 4, but the majority of these techniques are going to work just as well in UFC 3 because the creator fighter system is basically the same. And maybe possibly even UFC 2. I'm not sure, I've never played it, but it wouldn't surprise me if all the same tattoos were available in that game. But regardless, I think I've posted probably nearly 100 fighters on this channel now, from both UFC 4 and UFC 3, and I like to think that I've learned a lot from it, so it just made sense to try to share it with you all. Plus, when I post my formulas, I generally don't do voiceover, so if you have no experience using the tattoos, you might have no idea what's going on when it comes to that part where you have to copy them out. Especially considering, like, for example, when you're putting tattoos on a face to enhance facial features, you basically have to have your nose pressed up against the TV to see what you're doing because the view is so zoomed out. Before we get any further, all the fighters you're seeing in this slideshow right now are posted on my channel, and they all use one or more of the techniques that we're going to be going over in this tutorial series. My initial plan was just to bang this all out in one video, but as I started putting stuff together, I very quickly realized that it was going to be way too long, so I'm just going to break it up and do a whole bunch of smaller portions, and then it's easier to digest anyway. And at this point I'm thinking it's going to be around at least 10 videos. But that's not set in stone either, we'll just see where we end up. And I don't have a schedule for it either, so these tutorials will just be coming out as I get to them. The plan as of now is that I'm going to put a little video together demonstrating on a blank fighter whatever the technique is that I'm going to be going over on that day, and then we'll have a look at basically a case study of where I use that technique on one of my own created fighters, and we'll see what it looks like in practice. And we're going to be starting with the complete basics, like super basic. So at the end of this video today, I'm simply going to go over the controls for the tattoos, and then simple stuff like rotating them, flipping them, introducing the concept of opacity, layering, colors, so on and so forth. And then in the subsequent videos, we'll get into the deeper, more nuanced techniques where we'll be discussing how to add detail to faces, how to add body definition, how to add texture to the skin, how to add accessories with tattoos, as well as actually using tattoos as tattoos. Because for the most part, this series is going to discuss using tattoos not as tattoos, but as a way to enhance our fighters to make up for the, lack of options with the head sculpting, with the hair options, with the clothing options, etc. And while I do have a lot of complaints about the Create a Fighter system, like the head templates for example, or the fact that we aren't able to use the color white, just to name a few things, I am of the opinion that the tattoo section is very useful, and I think you guys are going to see why as we look into some of the effects that we can achieve just by using tattoos in a subtle way. Keep in mind that everything that I'm going to be going over is not necessarily the best way to use the tattoos, and it's definitely not the only way. It's just the way that I've found useful, both from experimenting a lot as well as watching other people post formulas, and learning from their techniques, because there's a lot of talented people out there that are putting out formulas and they're way better at using certain aspects of the tattoos than I am. But it's all good because we're learning from each other. I mean, you might watch this series and you might already know 95% of this stuff, or you might have better techniques for doing a certain thing, and that's awesome. But the hope is that you'll at least be able to learn something from me and maybe adapt it in your own way and improve it, and then the state of created fighters everywhere gets better as we all learn together. And lastly, before we get into today's lesson, I'd like to give you a little preview here of the type of things that we can achieve with a little bit of time and effort in the tattoo section. So, what we're looking at is my Fedor calf that I posted a couple of months back on the channel. On the left, the before picture is the Fedor calf without tattoos. On the right is the after picture after I've added tattoos to increase the detail in his face. When we're using tattoos to achieve these effects, it's a very fine line between making them too noticeable and not noticeable enough. And the goal is to hit that sweet spot, which is what we're going to be trying to do in this tutorial. And believe it or not, on the right hand side, on the version that I've applied the tattoos on, off the top of my head there's at least 20 tattoos on that face. If you look a little bit closely, we can see, starting from the top, we have a tattoo to outline his hairline. We have wrinkles on his head. We have sideburns on the right hand side, which we don't have on the left. We have scars above both of his eyes. We have frown marks in between the eyes. We have some reddening on his nose. We have reddening to define the shape of his cheeks. That's very subtle on the right. You don't see it on the left. We have a smile line, which is basically, if you look closely on the right hand side, we see it goes from the edge of his nose diagonally down his face towards his mouth. We have another tattoo above his lip on the right hand side for some lip definition. And we also have a half moon that's just above his chin for some chin definition. So as you can see, you can achieve quite a lot with the use of a couple of tattoos. Let's not get it twisted though. Tattoos are not a replacement for a face sculpt. Like if we do a shitty face sculpt, you're gonna end up with a shitty result no matter how many tattoos you plaster on someone's face. But a decent face sculpt coupled with some proper tattoo use, in my opinion, achieves some very good results. Keep in mind for this example, we're not actually adding these features. We're not adding hair, we're not adding wrinkles, we're not adding scars, we're not actually adding the depth to these looks. We're simply adding the perception of them. We're just using tattoos to duplicate the perception of these features. So it's not a perfect system, but we're simply making do with what we have. We're using the tools that we're given to make up for where the created fighter system lacks in other areas. And the end result we're aiming for is that we want our eyes to see these features, but not notice them, if it makes sense. So the idea is that if I just showed you the picture on the right, that you would immediately recognize that it was Fedor based on his face sculpt coupled with the use of all of the tattoos to achieve those subtle little features. If I did a good job, that is. Okay, so now we're going to hop into today's lesson, which is the basics. So I've got this little test dude on the screen, and I've put a couple of tattoos on him just for demonstration purposes, just to see how we're going to be able to move and morph the tattoos around on the body. And we're doing all this on PlayStation, but it's the exact same on Xbox, except the controls are labeled differently. So here we're going to highlight this first tattoo. Square button is the horizontal flip, triangle button, vertical flip. So that's a quick way to reverse whatever tattoo you're using. Flip it up and down. L1 and moving the right stick is going to allow you to stretch it sideways, stretch it up and down. And then up and down on the D-pad is your scale tool. So you can stretch it sideways, down on the D-pad, scale it down, scale it back up. L1, right stick, stretch it up. And then we use our L2 and R2 buttons to rotate. So right now I'm simply holding L2, we rotate it in a circle. R2, rotate the other way. And then we also have the duplicate option, which is pressing down the left stick. So I'm going to grab this bottom tattoo here, I'm going to press L3 to duplicate it. So now we have a second one, square to flip it, and we're just going to make a quick little symmetrical shape here just to show you the operations. Duplicate it again, rotate it, place another one, and then duplicate it again, triangle, flip it. There, we got a quick little shape completed there. And we'll duplicate it once more and show you a couple of the operations we did on the other tattoo. So we're just going to bring it down here, rotate it a bit, scale it down, L1 and up on the right stick to stretch it, down on the D-pad to make it smaller. Then we can do the opposite. L1 and right on the stick will stretch it sideways, and then up and down on the D-pad to scale it up and down. And you can morph it in all sorts of ways for whatever purpose you need it for. Okay, here I want to talk a little bit more about the duplication function and why it's so useful. So I'm just going to grab a random shape here, and then we're going to duplicate it a bunch of times. Again, by pressing L3 or down on the left stick. So we're just going to place one, duplicate, place another one, duplicate. And the nice thing about the duplication is when you duplicate a shape rather than creating a new layer, the duplicated shape will retain all of the properties of your previous shape. So I just made a quick little bunch of circles in a group there, and now we're gonna write a word on his body. We're just gonna write the word test. And when you see you first pick the T, it's really big, so I'm gonna scale it down, and then that's gonna become my template for the rest of my letters in the word. So then I'm gonna duplicate it, and then I'm going to press on that layer and then go and pick the letter E. And then the E is going to be like the exact same size, the exact same opacity, the exact same shape as my T. Whereas if I went and pressed new layer and then picked the E, it would be a much bigger size, and I would have to manually try to match the size of the T, which just makes things really complicated. So that was the quick little demonstration of why duplication is so useful to us. And here is duplication in action. So this is my Hulk created fighter, and I'm dressing him up as a Ninja Turtle, so I'm adding definition to his shell. By the way, this formula came from a guy named Killing Spree 37. Honestly, might be one of my favorite created fighter formulas on UFC 4. Awesome, I would encourage you to go check it out. But the duplication function made things very simple. So I picked my first shape and then just L3, 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 and I get the exact same size of, what is that, hexagon? Whatever it is, over and over again, so I can very quickly fill out the shell rather than having to resize each of those shapes. And it was a huge time saver. Trust me, duplication is our friend. Now let's move on to the concept of opacity. So opacity is basically the intensity, I guess, of the tattoo. So 100% opacity means you get the full color. 0% opacity means it's fully transparent or fully invisible. So I'm just gonna grab one more tattoo here and give you a little demonstration. So I'm just gonna grab this black shape, cover the entire body. So we're no longer going to be able to see the first three tattoos, but then if I press left on the D-pad, we're going to bring our opacity down, right down to invisible. Now we can completely see the tattoos underneath. Increase the opacity again. We can't see them anymore. Again, you increase the opacity with right on the D-pad and decrease it with left on the D-pad. I would say the majority of tattoos I use are at least slightly opaque, unless you're trying to add an accessory or something, as generally tattoos or details that we're adding are not going to be a full color, otherwise they just look fake. And here is one of many instances where opacity was very useful. So this is Furiosa from Mad Max that I created, and these next tattoos that are being outlined were basically an attempt by me to make it look like she was covered in dirt. So I took a whole bunch of different tattoos with a lot of black color and odd shapes in them, and I stretched them out across her body and then brought the opacity way down so you could just barely see them. We didn't want any defining symmetrical features, we just wanted to make it look random and dirty, and I think it worked pretty well to achieve that effect. On to layering. This is another important concept that you're probably going to want to understand. So if we look on the left hand side where all of our tattoos show up, the earlier or lower on the list that we have a tattoo placed, the deeper it's going to be on the body. So as we add layers, the next layer that we add on top of the previous layer is going to show up on top of all of the previous layers. So right now I'm just duplicating circles and then changing the color to demonstrate this. And if we want to move any of these layers so one shows up over the other, we simply hit square on the layer and we can move it. So now we've moved the black layer and it covers all the other layers, and we'll move it down one by one. And as we move it, the layer on top of it will show up. So if you're ever trying to achieve an effect on the body and it's not really looking how you want it to, I would recommend playing with both the opacity and the layering, because it's possible that you might have things layered improperly and then you'll be seeing tattoos over top of others that you don't want to be visible. And here we're going to take a look at this tattoo that I put on Austin Vanderford, who is a Bellator fighter, to see how layering can be important. So he's got this crazy ass eye tattoo on his neck, which is, in my opinion, pretty cool, by the way, but also very complicated to recreate with our tattoo system. So when I do these ones where you have to use a whole bunch of different tattoos to achieve an effect, I generally start with the bottommost layer on the outside and move my way inwards so the last layers show up on top. So you're going to see me selecting layer by layer from the outside in. And then you can see this third layer here is a blue or purple shape, and it's also pretty opaque. So we're going to get the effect of the purple, but we're also going to see the layers underneath it slightly as well. And then it's just more layers trying to make this replicate the eye that is on his neck. And as we get to the end, the last tattoo is going to be the small black circle, which is going to be on top and show up last. Another basic concept of tattoos before we move forward that I'd like you to keep in mind is the concept of how skin color changes the color of tattoos. When we have the lightest skin, we're going to get the brightest colors. When we have the darkest skin, just like in real life, when you tattoo on darker skin, it's not going to be as visible to us. So if you want to achieve very bright colors on the body of your fighter, just keep that in mind. And finally, the last thing we're going to discuss in today's video before moving to the next episode is when you're tattooing small details on the face, the view is very zoomed out when we're in the tattoo section. So what I generally do is I place tattoos about where they're going to be. So here I'm adding frown marks and I just place them generally, and then I go either into the head view or the eyes view in the menu so we can zoom in and get a closer look, and then we head back to the tattoo section, edit them as necessary. You know, you play with the opacity, you rotate them, you change the size, you change exactly where they're located, and then it's just rinse and repeat. Unfortunately, it's just back to the tattoo view, back to the zoomed in view until you get them exactly where you want them. And I'm not doing it perfectly here, but I'm just showing this as a quick demonstration. And it's definitely unnecessarily time consuming to do this, but unfortunately it's the best way to do it because there's no other option. And that is pretty much it for the basics. So that will be it for this video, and the next episode we are going to be covering lettering and making them aesthetically pleasing. So until then, peace.